K-12 education budget. It's so great to see so many familiar faces in a familiar place, and some new faces. We definitely want to tell you that this is going to be a fun committee, a busy committee, and I'll give you a little bit more information about that. But before we begin with introductions of ourselves and our staff, I will go ahead and take bill introductions, if you have one. Yes, Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 23 RS number 0325. It's an act concerning education relating to the tax credit for low-income student scholarship program.
And to note, do we have anyone taking minutes? No. And I'll speak to that in just a minute, but I do not have an office assistant or a committee assistant. So at this moment, there are no minutes, but I am sure they're probably watching online, LAS, and they can get there. Yeah, they can go back and take minutes, I'm sure. Because I don't think we need minutes for every budget meeting, but I'm writing down this as well. So that's why it's taking me a little bit longer here. So Representative Johnson and then Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to introduce by the committee RS 0312. It's a participation involving KSHSAA students in sports.
Okay, and we go ahead and take both of those in, and those requests for introductions. Any other requests for bill introductions? All right, and just to note, my preference is for bill introductions to be made by committee members. So if there's somebody out in the public or a stakeholder, they can give that to you and you can make that introduction, and we will go ahead and take whatever introductions are provided. So you don't have to have it approved by me ahead of time or anything. Just bring those to the committee. All right, so without further ado, without any other bill introductions, we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves and our new members, and we'll start with Representative Garber. Please just, besides your name, even though we can read, how long you've been in the legislature and anything related to K-12 or education experience that you'd like to share.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I am Representative Garber, represent District 62, which is Nemaha, Brown County, and a third of Jackson County up northeast Kansas. This is my seventh term, 13th year. Married to a retired elementary school teacher. I taught myself in the Navy, but that's a little different than public education. So, but welcome, glad to be on the committee. This is my first year here, so I'm excited to learn what's going on.
After 13 years, or 13 sessions, no, 13 years.
13 years.
You've landed here, so
yes.
Welcome.
I've been on many committees.
Yes, that sounds like it. Okay, Representative Schmoe.
My name's Rebecca Schmoy. I am the representative for the 59th district, which is most of Franklin County. I worked for the public school system in that county. I was a para-educator in a life skills classroom at the elementary level, and it is a great passion of mine to make sure that we are not forgetting those who don't have a voice.
Thank you. Welcome. Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Poskin, Kansas House District 20, which covers Overland Park and Leawood. I represent school districts for Blue Valley and Shawnee Mission. And one of my favorite ties to education is that I'm a mom of 7 children who spent 90 years in K-12 classrooms, including 62 in Johnson County Public Schools. I'm delighted to be on this committee, and thank you for the welcome.
And welcome to you. Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I represent the 70th District in Central Kansas, which is Dickinson and Marion County. We have, of course, the distinct pleasure of taking Dwight Eisenhower K through 12 in Dickinson County. And my special interest probably is that I served on the State Board of Education and have long held an interest in how our kids are educated.
All right, great, welcome. And Representative Adam Thomas.
I'm Adam Thomas, as she just said, so thank you. My name tag is paying off well. I represent the 26th district that's south Olathe, parts of Spring Hill into Miami County, and also a little bit of Overland Park into the Blue Valley School District. So it's an honor to be here. This is my third term. I've been on K-12 budget since I've been here. I've always enjoyed it. My passion is kids. I was a substitute teacher for the last 3 months of last school year. Other than that, my background is just being a seat at the table for everyday moms and dads that have to drive their kids to school, drop them off, get them ready, do their hair, and pick them up in the afternoon. So glad to be here.
All right, welcome back. And also to note, he is chairing education. And Representative Nguyen.
Good afternoon. Representative Aldinia Nguyen from Kansas City, Kansas, 34th District. This is my 12th session, and see some very new faces on the committee as well as in the legislature. So I look forward to interacting with you on this key topic. I know most of you all on appropriations over here, but I would say education is probably top of that. But nevertheless, I am a professor of history at the Community College in Kansas City, Kansas for a long time. I'm also a board member of USD 500, KCK, and just education is in my DNA. So I've been on education ever since I've been here for 22 years.
All right, thank you, Representative Nguyen. And she's been my ranking member since this will be our 5th year together in this committee. And I'm Christy Williams, and I'm from Augusta. And this is my 5th year to chair this committee, and it is my 9th year in the legislature. And I'm a mom of 4, so I don't have 90-some years in education, but they are all public schools, have been public school students and public university students. And I'm a former teacher, and I keep my licensure, and I'm very happy to be here and take on these exciting issues again. And so now, my friend Representative Landwehr.
Brenda Landwehr, I'm from the 105th District in the west side of Wichita, one of many legislators down there in that area. This is actually my 31st year, not consecutive, in the legislature. I've been on the K-12 budget since I've been back, so this will be year 7 to be on this budget. I've served quite a few years on appropriations over the years, as well as the Health and Human Services Committee.
And Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tim Johnson of the 38th District, which is made up of portions of Leavenworth County and a little smidgen of Wyandotte County. I represent the Piper School District, where I used to be on the school board. The areas of Basehor-Linwood, part of Lansing, and a little bit of Tongi. Prior to coming to the legislature, I was a teacher and taught both at Kansas City, Kansas, at Wyandotte High School and at Basehor before I took this job. And I'm also an adjunct instructor at the Kansas City, Kansas Community College, and I look forward to what we can do for our kids. Thank you.
All right, glad to have you back. And Representative Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First thing I'll do is apologize for being late for the first day of school. I'm Susan Estes. I represent the 87th District in Wichita, so that's mostly north of Kellogg and mostly to the east. And a former educator. I hold a degree in elementary education, and I've also taught elementary and bilingual education.
All right, Representative Boyd. Glad to have you, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. I am Brad Boyd. I represent the 49th District in Johnson County, which comprises the cities of Olathe and Overland Park. My connection to education, I am going into year 4 on the Olathe School District. I'm currently holding the position of Vice President. Happy to be here.
All right, great. Glad to have you. Representative Getz, is that correct? All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Getz, represent the 119th District out in southwest Kansas, Dodge City. It's just inside of that, none of the county. I have a daughter who is graduating from WSU this next year, who is elementary ed. And I have a son who, when he was born almost 7 years ago now, he was born with Down syndrome. So special education, funding, different things like that is a big passion of mine. And happy to serve on this committee. And I'm a freshman, so give me some grace.
And welcome and glad to have you. And last but not least, Representative Owsley.
I feel comfortable in my same seat here, so thank you for not giving me somewhere new to go.
You did that on purpose because you requested it last time.
I appreciate that. My name's Jared Owsley. I represent House District 24, starting my 9th session. I believe I've been on education for 7 out of 9 of those years, something close to that. So happy to be back.
All right, we're happy to have you back. And just a little fun fact, I did run into Representative Owsley on the top of a mountain in Hawaii just about a month ago. I was like, what? Who is that? So that was a little fun fact. So anyway, and staff, thank you for helping us out here. We really appreciate it. So we'll start with JG and end with Nick.
Hello, my name is JG Scott. I'm with Legislative Research. And this is my 21st session, and I had probably about another same amount in the executive session, or executive branch. So yeah, I did see the light and came back over here. So looking forward to working here. I'm sorry. And I have the Department of Education budget.
Hello, I am Amanda Prosser. I am with KLRD. I am brand spanking new, so do not ask me a single question, as in weeks new. But I'm learning a lot. I will be presenting the budgets both for the State School for the Blind and Deaf.
Question for Amanda, please.
Frankly, we're just happy that you're here and that you're willing to learn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm John Tay. I'm with the Broadcasting Services team, so I'm just here to make sure the show runs exactly the way it's supposed to. It's my first year in session, so I'm just happy to be a part of the team.
Okay, are you stuck with this group every day at 3:30?
I'm going to be here with you guys every step of the way.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes, ma'am.
It'll be fun. All right.
I am Tamara Lawrence with the Revisor of Statutes Office.
And my name is Nick Myers, also with the Revisor of Statutes Office, and I'm sure in other committees you've heard the spiel of what we do for you, but we're your bill drafting group and your group for bill amendments and any questions relating to legislation that you're seeing. And we'd be happy to help you out with other questions or get research involved as well. So. But we're here for you, and I've been staff in education ever since I got here, which this is my 10th session.
Can you keep us out of trouble?
Yes, he does.
Mess up in committee, you straighten us out.
And we very much appreciate our staff. I know that we often work at a fast pace in K-12. You guys will figure that out very, very soon. And so I want to, having said that, just jump right into the next before we get to our Spark funding and a little bit more information. So let's talk normally on the rules. I would just gloss over those. And so for the committee rules, they're standard. And if you have any questions, please let me know. But for the conferee bill, you don't have copies of these, and I want to just take a minute and talk about that. I appreciate everybody that helped me set up today, and I'm really hoping that I have a committee assistant tomorrow, maybe, and that would. Committee assistant also serves as my office assistant. If I don't, what does that mean for us? Well, first of all, that's why you don't have agenda sitting in front of you. That's why you didn't have anything really emailed to you except for me one time. And it also means that if we don't have an assistant, that you'll have to have your OA or your assistant go to the website, either the S Drive or the legislative page. Which one would you say, the S Drive or the? Yes, well, we don't know that either. So that is the next the next comment is that when you, of course, have hearings or informational briefings, then there's a great amount of testimony that will come in, or a great amount of information. And that requires somebody that has access to the system, that can upload it to the system and make it publicly available on the day of when it's available to you as well. So I don't have someone for that. So right now I can't even tell you where someone would email to be on the distribution list. So, or where they would send testimony when that day comes. I just hope we have someone by then. So, so we'll just work one day at a time. On the distribution list, in the past, what has happened with distribution lists is individuals, Cheryl, others will say, hey, I want to know meeting notices, I want to have the agenda set, whatever it is, and we have a distribution list. And there may be individuals sending their name to people that had been assigned to me that had moved, and that's happened several times, or they may send it to me and because of the circumstances, it's lost in space and I may never see it again. So when we do have a new person, I would ask everybody that wants to be on that distribution list, resend, even if they sent it to someone before, resend, and I'll remind you of that. In addition, on the conferee rules, I don't print testimony for anyone. I print it for myself because I prefer it, and I would just encourage you to also print it and find it again wherever it's uploaded, usually S-Drive or on the legislative website, okay? But one thing I really prefer, again, if I have someone, is having that daily agenda. So you can know exactly what testimony, what order, what we're talking about. I find that very, very helpful. So I would really prefer that. If you have any questions about anything, you can call me, you can get my cell phone, you can drop by my office, 352 South, next to Representative Landwehr, and I'd be happy to visit with you. And probably would have visited with most of you already, but things were chaotic just trying to find files, and so I was not in my usual self. So I bring up the conferee rules because I do like a certain thing, and I'm sharing it with you so you can share it with others that you might ask to provide testimony. And one of it is when you send it and you write in that email and you write the subject line, it's really good to put some helpful information so that we know where it goes. So for example, it could be the bill number and oral testimony. That means they physically want to be here, or there is always a WebEx option. I definitely will allow that. Or if it's written only. So the bill or the oral and written only. That really is going to help me if I'm the one that receives it, and the new assistant, whoever that may be, because we want to make their life as easy as possible. The other things is that I would encourage them to read these guidelines, because when you get testimony, I know that, again, my preference is when I pick up testimony, I have their email address in case I want to email them about a question on their testimony. I have any relevant contact information. It also should state what it's for. Again, you would be surprised at how many people forget to put the bill, or that it's for oral or written testimony. So that kind of information is really, really helpful. It's all on here. And finally, adding their name. They may email it to me, but not put their name on their document, and then when you print it and move away from your laptop, it's not there. So just really encourage people to take a look at this and try to follow it to the best of their ability. And that's kind of the basic summary. Any questions about that? And again, submitting testimony, since we don't know where they're submitting it right now, we just won't worry about it. Okay? Sound good? All right. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next item on our agenda. It's the review of the Spark expenditures for education. Just note, in the Education Committee, Representative Thomas, they are the ones that are going to be overviewing the ESSER funds. And so what I've asked Representative Thomas to do is, rather than for those that are on that committee as well, is to just provide us an overview, which he will do at a later date. But this is a little different, and so JG, if you'll just begin by even telling us what Spark is.
Thank you. I did print off a piece of paper for you. And it is just a summary of what Spark is. It is the Strengthening People and Revitalizing Kansas. It was a task force that was set up. It was set up to distribute some COVID relief funding, about $1.6 billion in flexible money. There was 4 task force that were set up to make recommendations on categories of expenditures and what to spend that on. They made those recommendations to an executive, Spark Executive Committee. There were 7 members on it, 3 appointed by the governor, the speaker and appointee, and the president and appointee were the executive committee. They then reviewed the recommendations from that task force. Those individuals had sent stuff in, and then they made recommendations to the State Finance Council. And the State Finance Council has the authority to authorize those expenditures. So that was the process that was used. The Kansas State Department of Education was allocated $54 million from that process. And out of the $1.6 billion, that doesn't sound like a lot. But as the chair had indicated, there was a lot of other funds that went directly to the schools, mainly those ESSER funds. Those totaled almost $1.5 billion that went directly to the department. And Representative Thomas is going to look through that information probably pretty quick. And so what I wanted to do here is just to let you know what the money that was allocated out of that $1.6 billion that went to education was for. And it through the Spark and the State Finance Council, $50 million was allocated for learning loss recovery programs. And it was because of the emergency. The way that I pictured this in my mind is that, and I have words here that are probably more correct, but in my mind, I think of this as like a store credit. You have a $1,000 credit to spend at the store, and this store is a portal that they're providing through a contractor, and it will have eligible services, computer materials that you can purchase through that portal. So that's kind of the way that this is set up to really help those learning grants go to individuals that are eligible, and I don't think I know what those eligibility criteria are right now. The other was $4 million that was transferred to the Connect Kansas and Learn initiative, which is mainly money that goes to match some federal dollars on the E-rate program, and that just helps build out high-speed internet broadband for those schools. And then below that, there were 4 other line items of appropriation that were made. There was $1 million for safe and secure schools. that if the funding was available and appropriate, it would be used for this purpose. $4 million to replace state general fund money if it was available for the virtual math program that was set up new last year. $2.2 million for building improvements to the school for the blind, for HVAC upgrades and renovations of 1.3 million. And then about 386,000 for language assessment for the school for the deaf. So those are those other pots of money that didn't go directly to the Kansas Department of Education or to the school districts.
All right, we'll go ahead and open up for questions. Representative Estes?
I could use a little clarification, please. On the 50 million learning, the grants and the $1,000 for Kansas children, was that spent by the parent or guardian, or was that spent by the school system to use in the school for that child?
My understanding is it's going to the students, those low-income eligible K-12 students, for them to work through the process, what they need. I'm sure that they'll work through their parents with that, but that's what the money is appropriated for each. That's my understanding.
So the student gets a good that they can take home and benefits them at home. Okay, thank you.
Representative Poskin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, on the grant fund, is that going to be a competitive grant for these low-income K-12 students? And do we know when that application will open up?
I think that there's going to be an eligibility, and I'm not 100% sure. The process that's going out for bid is to develop the portal, the eligibility determination, and that implementation and tracking those funds. So that's what's currently out for bid.
Any further questions? Okay, I have a few. Okay, on this topic, so it's our understanding that the Department of Administration is providing these grants. Is that the way you understand it?
Correct. That's
okay.
They're setting up the process for it to run through.
Okay, so it sounds to me, I remember the governor initially, when she announced this, announced it as a voucher program, but it sounds to me more like an educational savings account where there's an amount of money that they can use to help that child with tutoring and other expenses, and that there's some third-party group that can create that list of things that they can choose from. Is that correct?
That's what's out for bid and I'm sure that they'll work with the board for what those eligible expenditures are.
Okay.
And to coordinate tutors in certain areas as well.
Okay, so at this point, for this learning loss, where there was an immediate need, no grants have been given?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, and also, Representative Landwehr and I have met with the Department of Education, and they did mention, and of course it was already public through the State Board of Education, that they allocated $17 million, I believe, from this category, or maybe it was from ESSER funds, and I don't know if you know, for more of the third grade literacy. John's shaking his head. Was that third grade? Was that from ESSER? ESSER. Okay, great. So maybe at some point we can put in a request for the Department of Administration and see if they could provide an update on where they are in this process and when, what their timeline is to get this rolling for kids. And that would be great. That could be whether they wanted to drop in or just provide you that information for us. And I think some good questions were asked about the eligibility. So just kind of looking at the details. All right. If there are no further questions, thank you, JG. This wasn't so bad, right? No. All right, so we're going to move on to Nick. Nick's used to us, and Nick's going to give us our constitutional funding overview. It may seem repetitive because we've been around for a little bit, or some of us are new, but really it's the framework for all of our decision-making when we get into the budget. And it's a big budget because it's about $5 billion for SGF. So we want to make sure we're all on the same page. So thank you for presenting this. And no, not yet. But when you guys have an opportunity, if you would put this information on, where should we put it? On the S drive? Or when we get an assistant, our assistant will have this so you can get a digital copy. And until then, until we meet again, we'll find out where it's located so you can get a digital copy. Representative Landwehr.
Eventually, it should be up on the legislative website so that you could pull it down during the committee process.
Yes, absolutely, because very good point. We want it available to the public. That's on the legislative website under the committee page. But we also like to have it on the S drive so that you can pull K-12 budget and you can get everything that we've done. And in fact, you can do that for last year. You can look at 2022, go to the S drive, and you can kind of look at what would a normal agenda look like? What would normal rules and what are some of the things we tackled last year? They're still there. All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, we've got some extra copies here for people who are in attendance in person today. And then if anybody's watching online and would like copies sent to them, they could get in touch with us and I'd send them until they are posted online. And they will be. We'll make sure that these documents get posted.
I believe we just have, is just one packet?
So you should have the Article 6, the Constitution.
Not sure, yeah, I don't
The State
have
of
that
Kansas,
one.
Article 6.
Thank you.
And then a PowerPoint from our office that generally covers the Gannon litigation. Yes, thank you for making sure you got that. So, committee members, Article 6 of the Kansas Constitution, the starting point for education finance in the state. There's other issues in here. It provides that the legislature shall undertake certain duties, has an obligation to fund, and certain other items relating to the state board and local boards of education. But for our purpose today, we're focusing on the provision Article 6, Section 6B, which is on the second page of the Constitution, the finance provision. And the statement in the Constitution, the provision is that the legislature shall make suitable provision for finance of the educational interests of the state. And what does that mean? And that has led to school finance litigation occurring in Kansas. And if you turn on the PowerPoint, you can see on slide 4, you will see just a general quick summary of school finance litigation cases that have occurred and the preceding cases that have led up to the Gannon litigation. And you can kind of see a little bit of the evolution of how school finance has proceeded. And I'm not going to go in depth into any one Gannon decision. I just kind of want to touch the bases and get us to where we're at today, where the KISA, the Kansas School Equity and Enhancement Act, is at today, and a little bit of foreshadowing. You are right now, you're constitutional. You are completely complying with the court's order. Every bit of inflation adjustments, as we'll see here soon, has been added, and we're currently funding the full inflationary adjustment under the Montoy Safe Harbor Plan, but I'll get into that here in a sec. So what does suitable provision for finance mean? On slide 6, and as we'll see in the Gannon litigation, the Supreme Court over the years has said that this contains both an adequacy and an equity component. So this test was established in the very first Gannon litigation, or in the very first Supreme Court opinion in Gannon. Gannon had originally started in 2010 when a lawsuit was filed with the district court in Shawnee County, arguing that the school finance system was unconstitutional, both for total funding and also that there were inequities in the formula. Once this case proceeded to the Supreme Court, in the first Gannon case, they put forth these two tests that need to stay in your mind when you're thinking school finance. Adequacy means that the public education financing system provided by you, the legislature, for grades K through 12, through both its structure and its implementation, must be reasonably calculated to have all Kansas public education students meet or exceed the Rose factors. Equity means school districts must have reasonably equal access to substantially similar educational opportunity through similar tax effort. And on the next slide, you can see what the Rose capacities entail. And in this presentation, I'm not going to be going too much into equity. There's been a whole back and forth on equitable concerns, but currently there are no equity concerns in the formula that the Supreme Court has found, and I would be happy to discuss any of those with you at an appropriate time. For the main part of this discussion, it's going to be focused on that adequacy component. So in Gannon 1, as I said, the Supreme Court put forth those tests to determine whether the school finance system is providing a suitable provision for finance. And the Supreme Court sent it back down to the district court to evaluate using those two tests. The case didn't come back into the Supreme Court until the Gannon 4 decision. In Gannon's 2 and 3, they dealt with equity concerns. But then in Gannon 4, the case came back to the Supreme Court. And then at that time, we saw what the Supreme Court would do and how that body would apply those constitutional tests to the facts of the case. So in Gannon 4, when the Supreme Court applied the adequacy test to evaluate the public education finance system, the court considered evidence regarding both, one, the structure, as you saw in the test, and the implementation of the school finance formula. Under the structure component, the court essentially is just looking at the overall structure of it, and at this time the court was looking at the block grants bill. A period of time when schools were funded just with block grants, there were no weightings. As the system provides for now, it was just a block of money, and the Supreme Court was looking at this. And under this decision, the Supreme Court found that the structure of the formula was unconstitutional, that it did not profess to be a long-term school finance formula, and that it was not responsive to financially important changing conditions such as student enrollment factors. The main part of that Gannon 4 decision, we saw how they were looking at the implementation component of adequacy. And what the court did is they looked at the inputs that were going into the system and the outputs. So the court, under the inputs, were looking at the funding levels. So they were looking at the total amount of funding, but the court oftentimes said that total spending is not the touchstone of adequacy, but that actual funding levels still remain valid. Funding sources, the court was looking at the different sources of funding, and the court in this decision kind of chastised the panel, the district court panel, saying that the panel should have given greater consideration to all sources of funding, including federal funds, CAPERS, and locally raised funds when they were looking at the adequacy component. And then the court also looked at the funding impacts. Next, the court looked at the outputs of the school finance system, and in this analysis, they looked at state assessment results, NAEP scores, ACT scores, graduation rates, and generally these were scores from 2011 to 2016. And what the court found in these scores and this evidence was that it generally showed that there was a declining proficiency across all students and across student subgroups especially. The court also noted that achievement gaps were persisting for those student subgroups and for those harder to educate students. And they noted that essentially nearly a quarter of all students were failing to achieve in both math and English language arts, and that the state is also leaving behind those subgroups with this formula. After that decision, when the court found that the Class Act was unconstitutional, the legislature took some action, and this is when the legislature first enacted the KESA, the Kansas School Equity Enhancement Act. They repealed the block grants, you repealed the block grants, and in this formula, the legislature provided 2 years of base aid increases and made some other adjustments, targeted funding increases such as all-day kindergarten, increasing the at-risk weighting, authorizing high-density at-risk building level calculations, authorizing bilingual weighting to be determined using contact hours or headcount hours. And I think this total was approximately $300 million, $290 million increase. The court in Gannon 5 took a look at that, and this is slide 26 if you're following along on the slide approximately. And again, Gannon 5, they evaluated using those constitutional tests. And what the court said is that the structure of the KESA is okay. Under the structure component, the KESA formula is okay. It's adequate, but the implementation component still fails. And that the legislature failed to demonstrate how the KESA financing system is reasonably calculated to meet the ROSE capacities and have all students meet those ROSE capacities. After Gannon 5, the legislature passed legislation again that attempted to return the school finance system to the same level of funding that was last approved by the court at the end of the Montoy litigation. So after Gannon 5, the legislature chose to take and follow through with what they called the Montoy Safe Harbor Plan. And what this plan did, and this is on slides 30 and 40, is that it essentially took the total amount of increased aid to schools based on post-Montoy funding levels. So the last time the legislature was constitutional under the Montoy litigation that preceded Gannon. So it applied the base aid as it existed in 2010 to the current student population. It determined what that formula calculation would have provided in state aid in 2010 through 2011. And you can see that chart there. And then it started to add inflation for each year. And it adjusted that amount forward for using those inflationary adjustments with the CPIU for the Midwest region. And then finally, it determined a target amount of state aid that was needed to be infused into the system. The legislation also provided another round of additional targeted funding, such as special education, ACT work keys, mentor teacher, mental health pilot program, and preschool at-risk program, and then addressed some equity concerns. In Gannon 6, the court looked at this Montoy Safe Harbor Plan and this 5-year infusion of money through 5 years of base aid increases. And the court said that even though the Montoy Safe Harbor Plan is close, it still fails the adequacy test. It's still not reasonably calculated to have all students meet or exceed the ROSE factors. And the court said that it's because the plan's purpose was to add inflation. And the court chastised the legislature, saying the legislature left off 2 years of inflation. So the 2017 and 18 school year and the 2018 and 19 school year needed to be added in with inflationary adjustments. And then also that inflation needed to be added across the 5 years that that amount was being infused into the system. The court observed that that inflation rate, the average inflation rate on the Montoy Safe Harbor Plan chart was at 1.44%, and the legislature went back to work. So after Gannon 6, the legislature used that inflation rate and increased the remaining 4 years of base aid increases that are in statute, and essentially added $90 million to those base aid increases, and then made some other modifications. So after Gannon 6, the court took one final look to see if the legislature had substantially complied with its order, and the courts held, and this is where we're sitting right now, that we now hold that the legislature's additional funding of its Montoy Safe Harbor Plan, the state has substantially complied with the mandate from Gannon 6, but the court retains jurisdiction. So currently, right now, the court still has jurisdiction over Gannon. I'm not aware of any motion to dismiss being filed yet for that case. So the court's maintaining jurisdiction. And the court also said in this decision, more specifically, the legislature has protected the total amount of money, both old and new, that they identified in Gannon 6 from being devalued by inflation. And I just want to note the state urged the court to dismiss the case, and the court chose not to dismiss the case at that time because the plaintiffs were asking the court to retain jurisdiction because at the last time, as the plaintiffs argued, the legislature under Montoy started to deviate from its funding plan after Montoy had ended. So the court retained jurisdiction to what they said, to ensure continued implementation of the scheduled funding. And again, currently this year, the 2022-2023 school year, the legislature is financing that 5th year of that 5 years of base aid increases, which means all the inflation adjustments that you chose to make under the Montoy Safe Harbor Plan have been completed. The KISA formula is currently in constitutional compliance, but the court still retains jurisdiction. And I will note also in that base aid statute, the base aid is set currently to continue to rise with that CPI Midwest region inflation adjustment. But I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know that's a real quick dive into a lot of complicated stuff. And on our, real quick, Madam Chair, on our website in the revisor's office, we've got a tab that's the Gannon v. State litigation tab, and we've got our comprehensive memos there, and also the actual opinions themselves from the Supreme Court. And those are always great resources to see what the court was saying or what the court was possibly doing in an opinion. Or so the court's language is all there as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, so I remember for those of us that have been here in the Capitol during the duration of this that started 2010, and for those of us that were here for only part of it, we would get those opinions and we would grab them, we would be looking over them and highlighting them, and I still have a notebook full of those opinions. I'd like to go ahead and open up for questions. All right, well, just one question for the benefit of the entire committee. We did talk about this during our special education interim. What did the Supreme Court say in their opinion on the special education funding?
So, yes, I'm trying to remember which opinion it was in. I know the plaintiffs argued, and at one point in time, or multiple points in time, the plaintiffs argued that special education funding was inadequate, that the failure of the legislature to fund the 92% excess cost rate somehow rendered the formula inadequate. And I think it was in Gannon 4, if I remember correctly, or maybe it was Gannon 5. But the court essentially said, they took that argument and said, we recognize your argument, but that doesn't render the structure of the formula inadequate. So if just by simply not funding at that 92% rate does not render the structure of the formula inadequate. It does, what the court said, it does and can factor into the overall adequacy analysis, but, and then the court just kind of left it at that. And just in subsequent opinions recognized increases in special education state aid that the legislature had made.
Okay, and thank you for that explanation. And we are going to go in depth on special education. So for anybody that wants more on that, we are going to spend a lot of time on that. That's one of our main goals here. But one of the agreements in the Gannon was that the legislature add an additional $44.5 million to special education 1 year, and then $7.5 million for 3 consecutive years following. And I believe, is that right, JG, that we have fulfilled that? Okay, and we have fulfilled that. So that was the agreed upon decision for Gannon, but we are definitely going to tackle this fully shortly. Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I find it interesting when I'm looking at the Montoy versus the Gannon in suitable versus adequacy. So are they using them as the same, or did Gannon look at it totally different?
So in Gannon, the court said that essentially this is all, adequacy and equity have always been concepts that have been within Article 6, Section 6B. They said that that's been the case ever since the beginning, and that essentially that's what Montoy was doing. And I think in the court's mind is that they were looking at both adequacy and equity, just not using those specific tests. But yes, I think Representative Landwehr, you're correct. There's been a little bit of an evolution, which happens with jurisprudence, but there's been a little bit of an evolution in getting to where these tests are now. So Montoy did not have that rows-based test, and the court in Gannon also said that kind of took an analysis of where rows came from and how it has been part of the state's finance system for a long time, and even in Montoy. But yes, I think you're correct. There's been a little bit of an evolution, but again, the court generally said that equity and adequacy have always been kind of part of Article 6, Section 6B jurisprudence.
I find that interesting, but that's not used. Okay, because I was actually here for Montoy. On the adequacy, we talk about, is reasonably calculated to have all Kansas public education students meet or exceed the minimal standards set out in rows. What do we have to show that that is being met, that the row standards are being met?
Yes, and that's the heart of it. And you look to those, as I said, that Gannon 4 decision was the first time that the Supreme Court applied their adequacy test to the facts of the case. And they were looking at those inputs, total funding, sources of funding, impact of that funding, and then they were also looking at those outputs. So they were looking at those test scores, graduation rates, NAEP, other types of, not just state assessment results, ACT, NAEP. But they were looking at those things. And just, so inputs analysis, outputs analysis under that implementation component.
You're right, but there's no consequence when the school does not meet these standards on the test scores, et cetera, correct? There's a penalty for us because the judges are still holding the case. So if we ever drop below that level until they release it, that case is right back there before them. It doesn't have to go through the legal process, correct?
I mean, that's an interesting concept, and I don't know. I don't know how that, what the future holds for the case in Gannon, nor do I know, what plaintiffs might argue to kind of start up the case again.
Okay, but it still goes back to, and if this is not the right question for you, I mean, that's fine, because you know how I do sometimes. It's like, but we have no guarantee that the row standards are being met with all of our students, do we? And they did, because I went through and read each one of the Gannon cases, and there was a big thing that was put on the number of kids that were not reading and doing math at grade level. That was huge in the Gannon. Unfortunately, I think when the final decision came down, they shifted, and it came down to just money. The final decision came down to money. So I'm not sure that we stuck to having solid, measurable standards that have to be met, and an alternative when that's not happening for the children.
Yeah, in Gannon, the court started, after Gannon 4 especially, the court started telling you, the legislature, you need to show your work. Show your work. Show us how you're going to achieve adequacy with the changes you're making. And the legislature attempted to do that. In Gannon 5, between Gannon 4 and 5, with the KISA formula, they tried to do that, show the work, and the court looked at each item and kind of said, that's not enough. Effective base argument type of thing, successful schools model, some of those things that were around back then or kind of built in back then. But yes, you're correct. The legislature put forth that Montoy Safe Harbor plan as the option going forward, as what the legislature is doing going forward. And then the court in Gannon 6 and 7 said, well, we're looking at your plan. We're looking at your plan that you're financing right now and whether you're substantially complying with that plan.
Okay.
And essentially in Gannon 7, they said you're substantially complying with your plan put forth, looking back at where the system was last constitutionally funded and bringing it forward for inflation.
I think, Madam Chair, probably one of the things that we need to get is let's look at going back at the beginning of Gannon of where we were at with test scores so we can see what the judges were looking at and then where we are at today with those same test scores.
So,
is that something, JG?
Well, so the problem with that, working with the Kansas Department of Education, is in 2015, in the middle of the suit, they changed both their standards as well as their standardized test. So I have requested that, but back when Dale Dennis was here, he said, well, that won't work because, you've got two different, it's not apples to apples, so there's no way to compare. But what we have been doing consistently, both in legislation and in this committee, we have been asking Kansas Department of Education to show their work, and you've been part of that, both on their website from 2015 forward. And if you notice, if you go to the website and you pull down for any school district, or even total for all 286 school districts, you can find out the last 5 years. So we would need them to go those years prior to the last 5, go all the way to 2015, and we could do that. Another thing that we did in our omnibus education bill last year is rather than just have Kansas Department of Education provide those outcomes on the website, we put in legislation, we want a summary report here to the legislature. What does that mean? When you have at this time period, 25% of our students not proficient. That was what it was, and that was the impetus, and that was the show the work for the plaintiff. That many kids were not where they needed to be. Today, we're pushing much higher than that. So we've added more money, and that's where we are. We've also seen a shift from focusing on that as a measurable, as a point of measurement into other areas. So it gets a little difficult. However, having said that, outcomes, student achievement is a high priority for this committee. And so that is absolutely part of what we'll be doing. And I believe that Representative Estes and Representative Thomas in the Education Committee are also taking a look at that, because we've had lengthy discussions on that. So for everyone here, just know we will dive deep into those numbers and make sure everyone here knows how to use the website and get the information you need. And in addition to that, we're going to help you understand your districts, their outcomes, and give you the information you need to make good decisions in this committee.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes, Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And kind of back to your question, you asked about the special education mentioned in the decision. You said that they required $44 million to be injected plus $7 million per year. Did I hear that correctly?
The court never specifically required that. That was part of one of the legislative financing plans in response to a court decision. So that was a legislative choice and part of the legislative funding package that the legislature put forth in showing its work, of what it was doing to meet constitutional adequacy.
Okay, so the Gannon decision's quiet upon special education funding then?
Generally, except for taking up the plaintiff's argument on it and just saying that it's not structural, the formula is not structurally unsound by not reaching that 92%. That doesn't just render the structure of the formula inadequate, but that, in the big picture, and I think the court's a lot of their decisions are big picture, looking at the whole system. In the big picture, special education funding can come into play in the adequacy analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and good point, but just to add on to that, so when the legislature had to show their work and they had to add money, and at each interval we did add money, it was resolved because the adequacy was considered to be complete at that time. They maintained jurisdiction, but they considered it complete. That adequacy, as Nick expressed, does include all pots of money, and it did include special education. So it wasn't something that was carved out and ignored. They looked at the whole picture. So just wanted to clarify that. And we will, and as you know, it's a passion for you, Representative Owsley, and it'll be a big point of discussion in this committee. Any other questions? All right, committee, I want to tell you again that I'm excited to work with you. Oh, Representative Hill.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you. I'm a little bit confused on the Rose capacities. Were those continued throughout Gannon? Was that a one-time deal, or did they continue to look at those capacities? And also, where exactly did the court system, why did the court system use justification for the Rose capacities when that isn't from our own state?
Yes, so the Gannon 1 decision, I need to go back and evaluate. I'd have to go back and read in full again, or look at where they analyzed the Rose capacities. But if I remember correctly, what they did is they looked back at Kansas state law history, and I believe Tamara will correct me, essentially the same Rose capacities, or very similar Rose capacities, existed in state law up to, was it 2005, around the Montoy time? It was like 1990.
Tamara just had her statute open. If she can find it.
So very similar capacities existed in state law, and then until about 2005. And then I'm trying to, I have to look at statute to see when the legislature, not we, but the legislature recodified the Rose capacities as they exist in 2014. So that was with the Gannon, kind of commensurate with the first Gannon Supreme Court decision. But Gannon 1 would be the place to go for that Rose analysis of how they were looking at the Rose capacities, which essentially stemmed from a Kentucky Supreme Court case back in 1989. And other Supreme Court, state Supreme Courts have kind of taken up use of the Rose capacities in a similar adequacy type of analysis.
Okay. Representative Landwehr.
Are you trying to say that Rose capacities was in there back to Montoy? I didn't think that we came in with the Rose capacities till like Gannon 5 or 6.
They were,
Kansas.
there were similar capacity, and we've got some memo or document that it kind of has both sides side by side, the 1990s to 2004, 2005 capacities, educational goals of the system, and then the current Rose capacities that were codified in 2014 again.
Anything to add on that, Tamara?
I'm sorry. So you think it was called something else in Montoy, not Rose capacities?
I don't know. I don't know if we've done research.
No, that's fine, but if you've got that side by side, I think that would be good to see. And we'll
All
start
right.
from that.
All right. Tamara, do you want to mention anything on it, or you just want to add that to maybe something we look at?
Nick is correct in that we do have a memo that we'd be happy to provide the committee that provides the history of how the Rose capacities came to be in state law.
Yep, that would be great. That would be great. We appreciate that. Representative Boyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. Did the court explicitly say whether their motivation to maintain jurisdiction was tied to the inputs or the outputs, or a combination of both?
No, And again, the opinions are always the source for the court's language, but I have in quotes here, there's some other statements in there that are probably very important in the court's mind. It's hard to see why exactly they retain jurisdiction or put exact words in their mouth, but I've got a quote here on slide 60 that it says, "We retain jurisdiction to ensure continued implementation of the scheduled funding."
And from the legislature standpoint, if we're going to maintain the implementation of the funding, we want to be sure that the schools are accountable and that there is improvement and not declining in academic achievement. So that's why we really stay focused on achievement, because that's the #1 purpose of why those kids are in school. So regardless of what the Supreme Court said on that, it is of highest priority to us too. So, committee, again, I love your questions. I think we're going to have a really robust group with lots of discussion. We've got some strong voices in this committee with lots of experience, and I am not kidding. I think we're going to have a lot of fun as we argue out different sides. So, with that, committee, I will, Representative Landwehr. Representative Landwehr, since I don't have an assistant, she's being my extra assistant, extra eyes on that. But just a reminder to take your folders, everything with you. I'm not sure if I'm going to provide folders, probably, maybe. So at this point, just know that you're responsible for printing off any of your material and bringing it, and hopefully I will be responsible for providing you agenda once we get organized. Also, we will, because it's Martin Luther King Day on Monday, of course, we will not be here. So we will meet on Tuesday and Wednesday. Rarely will we meet on Thursday, and never, unless something happens that's catastrophic, meet on Friday. So 3 days a week is the most that we would probably meet in here, except for those very kind of like at the end, we got to get this done kind of work. So with that, thank you for being here, and K-12 is adjourned.